Zorner. He is an electrical engineer. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of South Carolina and his master's degree from the University of Pittsburgh. His career spans over 30 years in the field of technology. Bob Swanner is a distinguished Toastmaster and the past director for Toastmasters in District 58, which is South Carolina. He's also my mentor at my Toastmasters Club, the Clemson Toastmasters Club. So I know him really well. Saying that, folks, it is with great pleasure that I now invite Bob to conduct the webinar. Over to you, Bob.
Great. Thank you very much, Hasala, and good evening to everybody. Just to give a little background, my journey into improving technical presentations started about 10 years ago. This was in the middle of the last big recession, and I found myself out of a job. Now, not one to brag, but I have a lot of technical chops. I've always done very well in my jobs and got good reviews and good raises. I figured getting a new job was going to be no problem. However, being in the middle of a recession and lots of other technical people were also looking for the same jobs, I find that I was not scoring those jobs. And it came clear to me that I needed to set myself apart, and I was aware that as a whole, the hardcore technical people often don't present well. So I found that I was not presenting myself well in the job interview situation. So that's what started my journey for improving technical presentations. Now, you might say, I'm not in sales. I don't really need to do non-technical presentations. But one thing you need to learn as early as possible in your career that everybody is in sales. You are selling yourself at job interviews. You're selling yourself if you're looking for a mate or you're trying to negotiate a bedtime for your children. Everybody does something that is salesy, and having good presentation skills is going to help you with that. All right. So along with art imitating life, this was actually the Dilbert cartoon from 2 days ago, where Dilbert has talked somebody into a boring coma from his long technical talk. So that's what we want to avoid. As technical people, we can get excited about the details. We can get excited about going into great depth and how excited you are. But depending on your audience, you might lose them relatively quickly. So that goes along with, here's the basic outline of what we're going to talk about. We're talking about knowing your audience and the various communication styles and how you'll need to adjust your style to meet them. I also have 3 tips that I've been using to help when I'm creating presentations. And then we're going to talk about focused practice. So let's launch into who is your audience. Knowing your audience. Anytime you take any presentation class, the first thing they're going to teach you is you need to know your audience. So and I'm going to go on the assumption that we're all technical people, given that this is an IEEE presentation. So a lot of times we're presenting to other technical people, and that's fine. But anytime that you start getting outside of that core audience, so to managers, to marketing, to sales, if you're trying to get your point across of your product or your idea, your audience is going to change drastically. So just like there's multiple personality styles, there are also multiple communication styles. Now, a lot of time they'll map to the 4 basic personality styles that you'll hear about from various places. So we're just going to go do a real brief outline of these 4 styles, how to recognize them, and how to adjust your style to match them. So the first one you might talk about is called either direct or sometimes called dominant. And this is, when I think of this, I think of the manager, right? This is someone who's very decisive, independent, confident, will come in here and make a decision and not wait for necessarily all the data to come in because we have to move fast, we have to win, okay? Just for the record, my wife tends to be very dominant in her decision making, so that's something that we've had to adjust to each other on. When you get into a conversation with a dominant, get to your point quickly. Do not spend a lot of time going over data and this possibility at that point. Get to your point quickly. Focus on solutions, and if they ask for details of how you came about that, that's when you can give them. But first response is to focus on getting to the point, giving them solutions. Second style you can talk about is initiating, and sometimes called the interactive. When I think of this style, I think of the cheerleader, right? This is somebody that's very gregarious, that's friendly, that's open. When they walk in the room, just everybody lights up. This is more your extroverted personality, very social, enthusiastic, energy, fun-loving, okay? These are the kinds of people that engineers like to hang around, right? Because we tend to be more introverted, they tend to be more extroverted, and can liven up a room. But when you're dealing with this type, you need to make sure to allow time for socializing. This is not somebody that you're just going to, walk into the office, get to the point, walk out, and expect to be as effective as possible. You're going to allow time for socializing. At the beginning of a meeting, create a friendly environment. Make sure you provide them time to express their feelings and opinions. If you come in there, especially if you're a direct person, and just give your orders and walk out, you're not going to effectively communicate with the initiating type. Moving on, the next is the supportive type. This is, when I think of this, I think of the grandmother sitting down drinking her tea. It's going to be steady, a calm, approachable. It doesn't have to be a grandmother, right? It can be, even engineers can be more of the supportive type. These are the type that are going to be more slow-paced, likes a personal, relaxed, no tension environment. Now, a lot of times in the technical world, we have a lot of tension, so a lot of these supportive people might not fare too well as technical people. Granted, that's just a wide generalization, but in general, your supportive types are not fare well in a high tension environment. You're going to earn their trust by giving them lots of reassurance. Again, spending lots of time with them, seeking their opinions, ideas, and encouraging them to express their concerns. All right. It's also, you're going to want to make sure to allow time for them to make decisions, where your direct people and maybe your initiating people might come to decisions quickly without weighing all the data. These supportive types will need more time. Moving on, the analytical and conscientious. Now, in general, your technical people are going to be more this communication style, very precise, exact, analytical, all right? Motivated by certainty, and you're not going to give up an opinion unless asked. If you see somebody that's sitting in a room who's paying attention but not talking, is probably more the analytical type. He or she is absorbing the data, processing the data, but it's not going to give an opinion until all the data is in and they have a strong opinion on that. All right. So you're going to make sure when you're dealing with this, again, this will be a lot of your coworkers. You're going to present them information in an organized manner and be prepared to answer questions on the details. All right. And it's similar to the supportive types. You're going to be patient because they're going to take time to think through and process new information. Now, I mentioned that my wife tends to be more the direct type. I tend to be more the analytical type. So a lot of adjustments that we had to make together is sometimes I have to give her answers before I am ready, right? I don't have all the data. I haven't thought through all the permutations, but she's ready to move on with the project. And she has learned to give me time. So that's just an example of where people need to adjust their communication styles to match others. So this next slide is kind of summary of the four, but also presents it in several different ways. You see the dominant, interactive, supportive, conscientious. Sometimes you'll hear people do a talk on personality styles, and they call it the DISC, D-I-S-C. So that's the four personality types that they use for that. Now, some people also like to use animals. And in this example, it's using the eagle for the dominant, and the gregarious parrot, and the loving dove for the supportive, and of course the wise old owl for conscientious. That helps some people remember. I've seen it also with sea animals, where you have a shark and a dolphin. I forgot all the different types. Now, personally, I actually like to use the colors better. When my wife and I will talk about red people or the greens. So anything that you can use to help you remember the different personality types and the different communication styles that go with them, and how you need to adjust yourself. First step is going to be make sure you know which personality and communication style is your preferred, all right? And some people are heavily in one, but everybody has a little bit of each. So it's not always, you're always dominant or you're always conscientious. So just remember that. Just as you work with people, start to learn, pay attention to that active listening where you're paying attention to them, understanding how they like to receive information, being understanding when they give information to you in a way that you're not used to. If they're not communicating with your style, you're going to have to adjust receiving information in their style. So again, as you're doing presentations to people, especially outside of your core group, your core technical, coworkers, it's going to get more and more important. If you want to take your idea to management and say, this is the idea that I want to move forward with, or this is the approach to the problem that we're trying to solve. Those people will tend to be different communication styles than your colleagues and coworkers that you're used to dealing with. That's going to be the number one thing to understand, is make sure you know your audience, communicate with your audience's style. All right. So here's a few tips that I have been using when I'm creating presentations. And the first one is every presentation should have 3 whats. So what are the 3 whats? First is what? And that is the first thing you're going to talk about is what is the issue you're discussing. So you're going to give a quick outline of what is you're discussing. And then the second one is so what? So we have this issue. What does this mean to your audience? All right. How does this affect the core business? How does it affect the project timeline? All those things. So what? What does it matter? You could tell them what it matters to you, but for the most part, they don't care. They want to know what it means to them. Is this a manager who is responsible for delivering a product on time? You need to make sure that manager understands how this issue affects their timeline. And the last one is, okay, so now what now? All right. If you go into a meeting and you have an issue, you want to also come in with a proposed solution. Now, maybe that proposed solution is, let's form a team to come up with the optimum solution, but you want to walk in with something other than just saying, hey, boss, we have a problem, good luck with that. All right. You want to walk in and say, we have a problem. Here's a few ideas that I have. We can recode this routine. We can, redesign this hardware. So that's the 3 whats that when you're creating a presentation, think about the 3 whats. What, so what, and what now? Another handy one that I like to use, and this is important, is the 10-20-30 rule. So every presentation that you put on there should not have more than 10 slides. This is a general rule. If you need 11, take 11. But the idea here is you're not going to bombard somebody with technical details, with a lot of text, and put them into the technical coma that we saw at the beginning. So get your idea across in not more than 10 slides. Should not take more than 20 minutes. And the 30 is all the text should be not less than 30-point font, right? So if you put up one of these, we've all seen them, these slides that look like an eye chart that you can't read, and you just get this gobbledygook of information. That's not beneficial for a PowerPoint, all right? You want to get your point across in those 10 slides in that 20-minute, and not less than 30-point text. If you're going less than 30 point, that's where you start thinking, I'm putting too much data on the slides. If you want to give them data, hardcore data, then do that as a handout. All right? You don't do that on your slides because nobody's going to sit there and read a long slide. Now here's where it gets interesting, because it's harder to write a 20-minute presentation than it is to write a 60-minute presentation. All right? People can talk about their problems for 60 minutes without batting an eye. But to take that problem, that presentation, that idea, and boiling it down to its essentials so that you can deliver it in 20 minutes takes more work. But it's critical. One, it makes you go through that process of boiling down what's the essential information, and it also helps your people you're presenting to get the idea without losing interest. If you start going more than 20 minutes for these ideas, people are going to start looking at their phones, they're going to start checking their next appointment. You're going to lose their attention. You will not be effective in communicating. So just remember that when you're doing a presentation, remember the 10-20-30 rule, and that's going to help you focus your presentation down. The next tip is to start with why, all right? Especially as technical people, we can tell people what we do, how, we create, electronic devices. We can tell them how we do it. We go through a process of creating it. And then the last thing we'll tell them is why we do, how people use it. If we get that far, we haven't lost their attention by then. But it's important to start, especially if you're pitching an idea, to start with why. Why are you doing this? Then you can, if they buy off on the why, you can tell them how you're doing it, what processes you're doing, and then if they're still interested, you can even give them the what, the technical details. So one good example I saw with this had to do with, if you ask people who invented the MP3 player, a lot of people are going to say Apple with the iPod invented the MP3 player. They came out with the iPod, put 1,000 songs in your pocket. But the truth is, over a year before then, Creative Labs came out with an MP3 player. Had all the same features and functionalities. But what they did is they sold it as a 1 gigabyte MP3 player. All right? So they came out with a 1 gigabyte MP3 player, and people said, well, I don't think I need that. Apple came out with the iPod and said, put 1,000 songs in your pocket. They told them why you want this right up front. They didn't worry about the details. So that's just an example. And that example actually came from an excellent book I read recently by Simon Sinek, and it is cleverly titled Start With Why. It went through great details. And these circles here come from his presentation as well. He called it the golden circle. As a leader, as someone who wants to get a point across, you want to start with why you do that. So I would encourage you, for those that are in a habit of reading self-improvement books, start with why in your list. Those that aren't in the habit of reading self-improvement books, that's just my personal tip is is go start doing that, because self-improvement is the only way we're going to get better. And speaking of self-improvement, all right, practice. When you're doing these presentations, you want to practice. And I found this quote that described it very well. Contrary to what you might believe, merely doing your job every day doesn't qualify as real practice. Going to meetings isn't practicing your people skills, and replying to emails isn't practicing your typing. You have to set aside some time once in a while to do focused practice in order to get better at something. So we all need to recognize that we're not going to be strong presenters naturally. Especially as technical people, we tend to be more introverted, very quiet. We don't necessarily get our information across to non-technical people very well, very effectively. So one thing I want to call here is the focus practice in that quote. There was a paper that was released a few years ago that talked about, to be an expert in something, you have to have 10,000 hours of practice. And so that was true for whether you want to be in Major League Baseball, you want to be a ballerina, you want to be the best electrical engineer out there. 10,000 hours of practice. And everybody focused on that. Okay, if I work on something for 10,000 hours. But that wasn't the whole point. It's not 10,000 hours. It's 10,000 hours of focused practice. So you can go swing at a baseball for 10,000 hours and just do the same thing over and over. You're not going to necessarily get any better. But you need that focused practice of somebody coaching you, watching you, and giving you suggestions on how to improve. Now, some of those suggestions may be outside of your comfort zone, but that's where we improve. If we always do stuff that's in our comfort zone, then we're just going to stay in that comfort zone and we're never going to grow. Now, where I found the best place to grow is Toastmasters.org that Hassan mentioned early on. That 10 years ago, when I recognized that I needed to improve my technical skills, the first thing I did was join a Toastmasters club, and I'm actually still a member of Toastmasters. Now, I'm a big believer in Toastmasters. I'm not going to say that's the only place that you can improve your technical skills. There are other places out there. But this is a nonprofit, so it's very affordable. It's people coaching each other. So if you are doing presentations at work and you don't do a good presentation, people note that, but they don't necessarily tell you, and they may not even tell you what to do better. And that's what Toastmasters or maybe some other focused organization will be doing for you. And that is, hey, Bob, I loved your speech. I like this part. I like this part. However, in that middle part, if you had done this a little bit differently, it would have been more effective to me. All right. So that's that focused practice. Not only are you getting the practice of standing in front of people, but you're also getting that constructive feedback of the things that you do well and the things that you could probably work on in order to improve your presentation style. If you do nothing else from this, if you don't do the 10-20-30 rule, I encourage you, each of you, to check out either Toastmasters or if there's some other organization that does something similar in your area. If you go to Toastmasters.org, right up there, there's going to be on the front page a Find a Club. Put in your zip code. It's going to show you the various clubs in your area and where they meet. And you can go and visit a club. There's no obligation, there's no cost to go and visit a club and get the feel for it. You might want to visit several different clubs because one thing I learned, there's no two clubs alike. And some club that you don't like, there's going to be another club that will fit in more with your personality style, what you're looking for. So that's my lecture on Toastmasters. Again, I'm a big believer in Toastmasters, but if there's another organization that can do the same thing for you, then go for it. All right. So that's really the ideas that I have for you tonight. Again, I wanted to be succinct. I think I went over the 20-minute rule, but I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to get out to you. So, Hasla, I think we're ready for any additional questions. Hasla, you there?
So here is the first question. Thank you, Bob, by the way. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So the first question is from Adam. He's a student member and he is from Poland. The question is, how about the one message per slide rule? Can you really build a presentation around 10 ideas?
I would say yes, and I would even go as far as to say your presentation should cover one idea. You're going to walk in there with, you're going to start with your why. You know, why are you doing this presentation? That's your one idea. And the thing is, you want to, when you're doing a presentation, you want to pretty much write your conclusion at the beginning. What is it? What's the one thing that I want my audience to do or think when I'm done with this? So that's going to be your why. I want people to understand nutrition better so they go home and eat better. That sort of thing. So then your 10 slides should be supportive data to convince them to that one idea. Yeah, and each slide should basically have one message on it, but it all should be supporting your one idea that you're trying to get across. Now, the 10-20-30 rule, again, it's just a guideline. If you need more, feel free to take more. Just remember that the more you go on, the more likely it is you're going to lose your audience. So if you have that one important idea that you want to get across, boil that down and really concentrate on getting that 10-20-30 rule going.
Right, so here is a second question. It's from Anne Meixner. The question is, would you agree that supportive people description would be considered introverted as well as the analytical people?
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't really clarify that too much, but really the first two I talked about, the direct and the, I forgot what I called it here, but the gregarious ones, the yellow ones, those are going to be more your extroverted personalities, while the supportive and the analytical in general are going to be your introverted personalities.
So the next question is also from Anne. She says a font size. I have heard that 20-point text is sufficient. I think what's more important is not to have all text. And she goes on to say there is a great TED talk by Simon Sinek that explains the start with why.
Okay, I'll address both of those. Yeah, 20. If you have more data than fits on there, then go ahead. We'll let it shrink down to 20 points. I know PowerPoint will often, as you add data, it'll shrink the font automatically sometimes. And to be honest, I struggled with this presentation because if I was giving a lecture about saying use 30-point type, I was making sure I had no less than 30-point type. But yeah, you don't want to flood it with just text, especially smaller text. If you need to go to 20-point type, then go to 20-point type. But it's the same rule before. That's a rough guideline. Just remember, if you start cramming it smaller and smaller and fudging it down, then you're going to be at risk at overdoing it. And yes, thank you very much. Simon Sinek, if you Google the TED Talks and Simon Sinek, he has a great TED Talk on, I believe it's called How Leaders Inspire People, or How Great Leaders Inspire People. And it gives a rough idea of the golden circle and the start with why. So be sure to check that out. If it resonates with you, definitely go and get that book or audiobook.
All right, so questions are pouring in. The next question is from Ian Kirkconnell. He asks if it takes you time to absorb information and questions, and you're receiving information from a direct individual who's going so fast, too fast. What's the best way to slow them down? So this is personally, this is something that I have experienced many times over, where the person is really good with his technical topic and he's very passionate and he wants to give all the content out within the limited time that is available to him, and he just goes so fast. So question is, what's the best way to slow them down?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. It's not only with the director, but also the gregarious ones, the outgoing ones, because they'll just jump from idea. They're if you ever take a screenshot of their brains, I bet it's just a whole bunch of sparks going over. Like they just have all these ideas that are just blasting out of them. They're not necessarily processing them, but as analytical people, we would tend to want to just like, let's take that idea, let's process it, let's break it down, see if it's possible. Best way I would suggest is you can ask them to put it in an email, or even if they're sitting there giving you ideas, say, okay, let me make sure I capture this in a document, all right? So that's going to automatically slow them down as you're typing it in and getting their ideas across. So that's the best way I've come across. A lot of times you can't, if you say, please document this in an email for me, a lot of times they won't, because they may have forgotten by the time they've got to the next cubicle. But that would be my recommendation of things to try. It's okay to say, slow down, wait a minute, which of these number one priority things do you want me to address? That'd be my best guess there.
Right. The next question is also from Adam, and he is asking question that most of us face, especially when we go and present to a new audience. So, what if I don't know my audience, like at a conference? How can I get a feel for them? That's his question.
That's a good one. And to be honest, I struggle with even doing this presentation, because not only do I not know the audience, I can't even see my audience. I did have the benefit knowing this was an IEEE talk, so I went on the generalization that most of these are going to be either analytical types. So you may have clues like that. You might be able to talk to the whoever's organizing the talk to say, what kind of audience do I expect? If it's going to be a lot of marketing people, that's going to be a different presentation style, and if you're going to all electrical engineers. But sometimes we just don't know, and you just gotta do your best. Recognize that not everybody there is going to be interested in all the technical data, and recognizing there that people would just want you to get to the point. Tell them, and that's why you want to start with the why up front. That's going to make your direct people happy, and then you can address questions as it goes to make your analytical people happy.
Right. So so for me, I face this question as well. So to add to what Bob said, what I'm trying to do these days is to change my speech or my presentation on the go, just by looking at the visual cues that the participants or the attendees are giving me. So and then changing my content. So it's not easy, but if you practice this, I think it will be helpful, because sometimes maybe we have a very big analytical, you know, big PowerPoint with a lot of data, which could interest only people who are very into your topic, like what I'm doing, voltage control for the distribution grid. The problems there are very specific, and if your audience is a general audience and you see that they are losing, you know, yeah, they are not paying you attention, then maybe you could, you know, generalize what you do and give a big picture sort of outlook onto your presentation. So that's something that I'm practicing. But so usually it's not as easy because you are prepared, and then you are almost doing an impromptu speech at the point of delivery, and it's a real time reaction. So something like Toastmasters would be a good place to try this out and practice it, and give you some feedback. You can get feedback and maybe improve on that. That's just one of my suggestions.
Right. And I could even add to that a little bit. One of the things that we concentrate on with Toastmasters is making eye contact with your audience. So that does two things. One is if you're looking at somebody, they're going to be more likely to be receptive to your information than if you're just staring down at your notes. The other thing is, like Asla said, is you will be more aware of your audience and whether they are nodding off or whether they are excited about the data. So that's the big thing, is be able to have the confidence, have the knowledge to look up at your audience, not be afraid to look them in the eye and see how they're doing.
Right. Thank you, Bob. So the next question is, it's from Danny, and his question is, what about technical presentations where you present a lot of data, more than 10 slides? So I mean, I have done slides like 50 slides in the
Right.
good old days. So he's asking like where you present a lot of data. So what do you do?
If you're doing a presentation to an audience that you know is all analytical types, uh, then you can be more comfortable putting more data in your slides themselves. However, what I would encourage you to do is have even less data in your slides and the gory detailed data either as handouts or PDFs that you emailed into them. So they will have the data and they can view the data, but they're not having to read the data and process the data, off tiny text in your slide.
Okay, yes. So the next question is from Stephanie. Stephanie is asking, how would you apply these skills to something like a job interview? Now, to our audience here, I must say that Bob is one of our best, or one of the best impromptu speakers that I have listened to. So I think he is one of the best people to answer this question. What if it's something like a job interview, something impromptu, something that you're not prepared for? How would you communicate your technical content to at that sort of scenario?
Uh, well, this wasn't really targeted at the impromptu speeches, but there are some nuggets in here that you can apply to uh, impromptu speeches. And I consider job interviews just an impromptu speech. One is, back when I was talking about the 10-20-30 rule, that being able to have the skills to get your point across in a short period of time is a critical skill. So that's where you really want to start with why, and then maybe give a little bit of an explanation of why you believe that particular statement. Where, and I appreciate Hasla's kind words about my impromptu speaking, but those were all skills I learned in Toastmasters. There's actually a section of each meeting that we call table topics. And table topics is someone stands up in the front of the room and poses a question or gives you a scenario. And then they call somebody at random. And that person has to come up and answer the question, address the question, or say how you would handle that scenario. And when I first joined Toastmasters, I hated table topics. It was so much pressure. But now it's actually one of my favorite things, mainly because I understand how important that is in the real world, right? Because a lot of times I refer to table topics as job interview practice. You're getting the practice and the skill set to stand in front of an audience and address a question that someone just gave to you, all right? And to sound intelligent while you do it. One thing I learned about job interviews is, yeah, they're going to ask you questions, technical questions maybe, and they want to know your technical chops. But a lot of times what they're actually doing is listening to how you answer it. Do you look them in the eye when you answer it? Are you confident? Do you structure your thoughts well as you're presenting it? So it's not always just the technical information, it's how you present that to them. So going to be able to succinctly give your information, be it in a 10-slide talk or in a 5-sentence job interview answer. Table topics also is great for practicing talking to people at a party, right? Someone walks up and says, so tell me about yourself, to be able to sound intelligent, not babble and just speak over yourself is an important skill to have for life in general. I hope that helps.
Yeah, those are very valuable feedback from you. So the next question is from Mexico. It is Maria from the Querétaro section. Um, and she's also chair of the PES chapter out there. So the question is, if you don't know the communication style of your audience, is it a good idea to have presentation with few text and more images or graphics, and to make it more interactive?
Short answer is yes, absolutely. And unless you know you're speaking to, giving a technical presentation to all technical people, I would encourage you to have less text, more graphics, even if it's graphs or pie charts, and always you want to be more interactive. And just like we were saying earlier, be aware of your audience. You know, are they following? Are they getting bored? Are they getting excited? And that way you can adjust your presentation on the fly as you go. And the more focused practice you have doing that, the more confidence you have the ability to pretty much change your presentation style on the fly if that's what you feel is needed in the situation.
All right, so that brings us to a final question comment by Anne, and Anne is from IEEE Region 6, Oregon section. So the comment is that one does not have visualization cues when presenting over a computer network, just like what we are doing right now. The overwhelming majority of my technical work presentations are done over the computer network presentation. So how would you give your vocal variety, or okay, not vocal variety, but how would you how would you do something like how would you give hand gestures, so the things that come with physical presentation which are lacking in an online sort of meeting? How would you give your how would you communicate this
Right.
with the challenges you have when using a medium like what we are using right now?
So a couple of tips that I've heard, because that is going to be more and more of a thing in the future, is doing these presentations. Now sometimes we have the video cameras and sometimes we don't. Where I work right now, I work at NCR, and we just tend not to use the video cameras. I think we all have them on our laptops, but nobody uses them for when we're doing these conference calls. Couple ideas to keep yourself interesting, for lack of a better term, while you're presenting. And that is, just don't sit in your chair, all right? During this talk, I've been getting up and walking around, and that just sort of gives your voice energy as you're physically moving. If you're slumped in your chair, it's going to come across. People won't necessarily say, oh, this person's slumped in a chair. They're just going to like, oh, well, that presentation was okay. But if you're up and moving around, you're just going to have more energy, more excitement. Another tip I heard, especially if you're doing job interviews over the phone or anything salesy like that, is you can actually have a mirror on your desk and you're talking to yourself in the mirror. And that's the same thing. You're going to be watching yourself. You're going to be naturally more energetic and outgoing because you're making yourself conscious that you are presenting to somebody and not just, talking to the air. So that's just a couple of tips I heard. The second one, I hear from a lot of people who do sales over the phone, where they have to come up there and be exciting and all that over the phone, where the only thing you have is your voice. So in this era where a lot of times our first interview is just a phone interview, that's a great tip to help keep you interesting and open on a phone interview.
All right, so that brings us to the end of all the questions that were presented. So the end of the Q&A session. So thank you very much, Bob, for preparing this for us and presenting your ideas, your advice to all these IEEE members from around the world.